Flowers in the Attic was first published in 1979. It is a Gothic horror novel about 4 siblings locked in an attic by their grandmother, while their mother tries to win back the love and forgiveness of her dying father, so he will write her back into his will before he dies, thus giving her his inheritance. The children are told they'll be locked away for a few days, but the days turn into months and the months turn into years. They're neglected by their mother and abused by their grandmother, and as the 2 older siblings grow up and enter puberty, things get complicated. When the novel was first released, it was an instant bestseller. It was also immediately banned across America. Since its release, it has sold over 4 million copies, has been translated into 19 different languages, and has received 2 movie adaptations. I watched the 1987 adaptation of Flowers in the Attic when I was young. I wasn't a kid. I was old enough to understand what the movie was implying, but was also too afraid to go near. When I got older and discovered it was based on a book, I needed to know why someone would write a book like this. Then, in 2014, Lifetime released their adaptation of Flowers in the Attic, and I needed to know why someone wanted to adapt this novel again. Both of these adaptations are weird. One doesn't have the balls to go near the material and the themes of the novel, and the other changes it or downplays it or softens it up. In this video, we're going to dive deep into V.C. Andrews and Flowers in the Attic, both the novel and the film adaptations. But before we do, I think it's important to understand the author behind the novel. Born in 1923, Virginia Cleo Andrews was the second of 3 children. She was the only girl, and her parents adored her. But all of that changed when she tripped on a stairway at school, twisting her hip and throwing her spine out of alignment when she was 17. She underwent 2 surgeries and was put into a full body cast, which unfortunately did not help her but made things worse. She was told she would spend the rest of her life on crutches or in wheelchairs. Now, she was totally dependent on her parents, and her mother Lillian was deeply ashamed of her. So much so, she wouldn't let Virginia be seen in public or even by the neighbors. If Virginia went outside to sit on the porch, Lillian would wheel her behind trees and bushes to hide her, and she made sure Virginia always wore clothes that would cover the wheelchair. When Virginia was asked how she felt about being hidden from the world, she would say, "I imagine I'm a princess in a castle enjoying life." Her cousin Pat, whom she was close to her entire life, referred to her as a romantic princess like Rapunzel. Pat said she once took Virginia to a shoe store when she was 41, and while they were there, Virginia told her she hadn't been to a shoe store since she was 16 years old. Since her accident, Virginia really had been hidden away from the world, almost removed from it entirely. And when her father died in the 50s, she became even more isolated. Virginia and Lillian lived off of the money Virginia made selling her art. And I'm going to be blunt with you, her mum was an asshole. She was controlling and cruel. She almost never let her out of the house. She controlled who Virginia could see, what she could do, and she would punish Virginia if she didn't do what she was told to do. How did she punish her? She would lock her in her bedroom and would deprive her of food. At some point, it's not really clear when, Virginia stopped making her art and focused on her writing. She wrote all sorts of stories, most of which were written under a pseudonym. An example of one of her unpublished stories is titled, "I Slept with My Uncle on My Wedding Night." In 1975, she completed a manuscript for a novel she called Flowers in the Attic. It was inspired by a true story she had been told by a doctor she grew close to while receiving treatment for her accident. He told her that he and his siblings had spent 6 years hidden in a family mansion to preserve the inheritance. As you can imagine, knowing flowers in the attic was inspired by something that really did happen to someone Virginia knew. People wanted to know more, but nothing more is known about this story or this doctor. No one knows why she wrote about incest. Media outlets speculated she was a victim of incest, but this has been denied by her family. When asked about where she got her ideas from and what was possibly her last interview with PM magazine, she said,
"You read the newspapers, the things that are done to children, that's where I get them from. They really happen."
Virginia dedicated Flowers in the Attic to her mother, but when Lillian learned there was incest in the book, she refused to read it. In fact, she didn't respect Virginia as a writer. She didn't encourage her writing, and she refused to read anything she wrote. Despite this, Lillian was a heavy presence at every public event Virginia attended. So much so, fans questioned if the mother-daughter dynamics Virginia wrote about were based on, or were at least inspired by, their own relationship. Stephen Rubin, a journalist from the Washington Post, questioned Virginia about her relationship with her mum. To him, Lillian seemed like an adorable little old lady, but Virginia told him, "Mothers wear two faces like most people." Virginia purchased a house for herself and Lillian to live in, where she eventually died of breast cancer in December of 1986. Before her death, she had published 3 sequels to Flowers in the Attic, and at the time of her death, she had been writing a prequel novel to the series, which she hadn't completed. Her publisher asked Andrew Neiderman to finish the prequel novels and to continue writing under V.C. Andrews' name, and he did. Neiderman has gone on to become one of the most prolific ghostwriters in history, having written over 60 novels under V.C. Andrews' name, and with plans to write more. After the sudden death of their father, one night the Dollinger children, Kathy, Chris, and twins Carrie and Corey, and their mother travel to Foxworth Hall, their mother's family home. The children's grandmother meets them by the door and quickly ushers the children into a secluded room in the house, which is attached to the attic, where they cannot be seen or heard by their mother's dying father or the servants. The children are told they are being locked away in the room and they are not allowed to leave. Their mother, Corinne, says it'll only be for one night, and then she says it might be for 2 days or 3 days, maybe even a week, but no longer than that. Just long enough for her father to forgive her and for her to tell him about her children. In the morning, the grandmother returns with a list of 22 rules the children must follow. Some of these rules are: never using the Lord's name in vain, never open the curtains, never use the bathroom at the same time as a member of the opposite sex, no touching, looking at, or thinking about their bodies or parts of their bodies, no thinking sinful thoughts, no looking at the opposite sex. They are not allowed to make any noise that will reveal they exist, not allowed to look at or talk to the grandmother when she gives them their food, not allowed to talk to her unless spoken to, and not allowed to think disrespectfully of the grandmother and the grandfather, and so on and so on. Later that night, the grandmother takes Corinne to visit the children, orders her to strip down to reveal to them the punishment she has received. 48 whip lashings going all the way down the back of her entire body. 1 for every year of her life, and 15 more for every year she was married to the children's father. The grandmother warns the children they will receive the same punishment if they break her rules. Afterwards, Corinne reveals that she and the children's father were half uncle and niece, and the children are a product of incest, which is why she was disinherited from her family, why she needs to earn her father's forgiveness, and why their grandmother hates them. To make things better for the twins, Kathy and Chris decorate the attic with paper flowers so the twins feel like they're playing outside. Corinne visits them every day, often bringing gifts, but as the days turn into weeks and the weeks turn into months, her visits become infrequent. When Kathy and Chris confront their mother about still being locked in the attic, she tells them they have to stay in the room until their grandfather dies, and they agree to do so. A year passes and the twins have stopped growing. Kathy and Chris are both going through puberty, and both of them are fighting off their romantic and sexual feelings for one another. One day their grandmother catches Chris staring at Kathy, and as punishment, she stops feeding the children for 2 weeks. As the children slowly starve to death, Kathy and Chris decide to escape with the twins, but before they can, the grandmother returns with food and a treat: powdered sugar donuts. Not too long after this, the children start to get sick, especially the twins. Another year passes by and Corinne visits her children for the first time in months and shares she's been away in Europe on her honeymoon. As the twins' health continues to get worse, Kathy and Chris focus on trying to escape and take turns sneaking downstairs to steal whatever they can from Corinne's room that can fund their lives after the attic. One night, Kathy sees her new stepfather sleeping in bed and she kisses him. When Chris learns about this, out of jealousy and anger, he sexually assaults Kathy. Not too long after this, one of the twins, Corey, becomes tremendously ill, and Kathy begs Corinne to take him to the hospital, but she hesitates. Kathy then tells Corinne that if she doesn't take Corey to the hospital, she will reveal their existence to their grandfather. So Corinne takes him to the hospital, but returns the next day to tell the children he died of pneumonia. When Chris goes downstairs to continue stealing from Corinne's room, he discovers that she and her husband have permanently left Foxworth Hall. He then discovers that their grandfather died a year earlier, and the grandmother has been taking food laced with rat poisoning to the attic due to a mouse infestation. Chris connects the dots and realizes the powdered sugar donuts the children have been eating have been contaminated with the rat poison, and that Corey likely died from arsenic poisoning and not pneumonia. Kathy, Chris, and Carrie escape from the attic, and while waiting for the train, Chris reveals to Kathy that Corinne's inheritance is conditional upon her having no children from her first marriage, and that it is more likely they were being poisoned by Corinne, not their grandmother. Flowers in the Attic is told entirely from Kathy's perspective, so everything we learn is from Kathy's point of view. Everything she experiences, we also experience. We get an intimate look at the children's lives in the attic and her complicated relationship with Chris and her mother. In the beginning of the novel, she's very much a young, innocent 12-year-old girl. Not only does she not understand the questions her grandmother is asking or what she's implying, she doesn't understand why her grandmother would ask such things of her. Kathy very quickly matures and becomes quite resilient. Kathy and Chris quickly become surrogate parents to the twins, both of whom totally forget who their real parents actually are. Straight from the get-go, Kathy is doubtful of her mother and her mother's intentions. She's quick to notice and point out the changes in Corinne as time passes by. She's also quick to call Corinne out on her lies and challenge her, which Corinne often struggles with or tries to dart around with more lies. Kathy is also constantly frustrated that Chris doesn't seem to notice these things, or if he does, he doesn't seem to be angry about them like Kathy is. She's constantly annoyed that Chris believes Corinne and always sides with her, and that his love and his trust in her is totally unwavering, until she learns how Chris really feels about their mother during the second half of the novel. People often call Flowers in the Attic a love story, a tragic love story, but I wouldn't call the first novel a love story. It's just tragic. Often the sexual encounter between Kathy and Chris in the novel is treated as if it were a moment of passionate, consensual lovemaking, when it's the opposite. Chris sexually assaults her out of jealousy and rage because, as he puts it, she is his. She belongs to him. After the assault, Chris acknowledges it was an assault and apologizes for it. Both Chris and Kathy feel tremendously guilty and confused about it, and they continue to do so for the rest of their life in the attic and after the attic. The novel is truly tragic and sad and heartbreaking. While I was reading it, I felt so sad for the children. I felt so sad for Kathy at times. It was almost hard to read. I was nervously reading the book because I was so afraid of what was going to happen to them and for what was happening to them. Right from the beginning, the grandmother is cold and loveless and abusive. The night they arrive at Foxworth Hall, she questions Corinne about any deformities the children might have, to which Corinne replies with, "My children are perfect, as you can plainly see." She calls them evil, the devil spawn, and sinful, and continues to do so throughout the entire novel. In the list of rules they're expected to follow, she threatens to relentlessly and without mercy peel the skins from their back. In Rule 18, she writes, "Nor will you seek to show signs of affection towards me, nor hope to gain my friendship, nor my pity, nor my love, nor my compassion. All of that is impossible. Neither your grandfather nor myself can allow ourselves to feel anything for what is not wholesome." A few chapters into the novel, it starts to become apparent that the grandmother has some sort of obsession with incest, or at least the idea of it, and possibly fears it. It very quickly begins to feel like she wants them to act sinfully. She wants the children to prove her suspicions right. Every morning when she gives the children their food for the day, she interrogates them, asking them questions about their purity and modesty, asking them questions they don't actually understand. Kathy is very confused by all of this, especially during the first half of the book. She really has no idea what the grandmother is implying or asking. As the book goes on and Kathy continues to grow, she starts to understand it more, but she is still very confused by it. Despite her growth, her innocence doesn't really change a great deal during the first novel. When the grandmother catches Chris staring at Kathy, her initial form of punishment is to punish Kathy only. She wants to cut off all of her hair to make her look ugly. She wants to punish her for being pretty and for thinking she's pretty. Chris stops this from happening, so instead, the grandmother punishes the 4 children by not feeding them for 2 weeks. One night she drugs the children, and in the middle of the night, she sneaks into their room and pours tar all over Kathy's hair. And the only way it can be removed is for her to cut all of her hair off. During the second half of the novel, when the grandmother lashes out at Chris for looking out of a window and yet again implying Chris and Kathy act sinfully, Chris spits back, "You want us to catch us doing something you consider evil." And as punishment, she drags him into the bathroom and whips him, and immediately afterwards does the same to Kathy. Kathy definitely endures most of the physical abuse in the novel. She's often the grandmother's number one target. Whenever the grandmother wants to punish Chris, more often than not, she threatens to do so by hurting Kathy. Corinne's abuse is mental and emotional. Corinne desperately needs her children to love her. Whenever she visits them, she's often telling them they should be happy for her or implying they no longer love her. She's trying to play the victim and make the children feel guilty for making her feel guilty for having no other option but locking them away. At one point in the novel, Kathy and Chris confront her about her lies and for how long they've been locked away, but this confrontation goes bad. Corinne is upset and angered by how they've treated her and stops visiting them for months. This makes Kathy and Chris fear she's going to abandon them forever, so they decide to not confront her again or say or do anything that would make her angry. During the first half of the book, Chris does believe everything Corinne is telling them. He genuinely cares for her happiness and her well-being. He genuinely believes she is telling them the truth. But by the second half of the novel, that changes. He is now choosing to believe he is doing the right thing by the children to help him survive each day. Kathy, on the other hand, at no point buys into her mother's bullshit. By the second half of the novel, Corinne has stopped acknowledging the twins, yet alone looking at them when she visits, and the twins no longer know who she is. To them, she's nothing but a stranger. At the end of the novel, when Corey is dying and Kathy forces Corinne to take him to the hospital, Corinne doesn't take him to the hospital. Instead, she sneaks him into the attic and hides his body inside a treasure trunk where he dies and remains hidden. In 1987, the first adaptation of Flowers in the Attic was released. It was negatively reviewed by V.C. Andrew fans and critics. Over the years, the film has received more positive reviews, but not from me. This adaptation feels like a soapy TV movie. It doesn't go near any of the horrors of the book. In fact, it stays as far away as it can from all of the horrors and themes of the novel. Most of the abuse the children endure in the book is not in this film. The twins are slapped, the kids are starved, and the grandmother cuts off Kathy's hair, which is different to the book, but I think this might be because other than going for a PG-13 rating, it doesn't seem like they've been locked away for years. The timeline of this film feels really short and condensed and rushed. A lot of changes were made for this adaptation. We see Corinne less with her children, and we see quite a lot of her with her father, often contrasting the children locked away. We see the grandmother often looking on at Corinne and her father with a sense of jealousy and resentment, which we don't get in the book. Corinne starts poisoning the children really early on in this film, almost straight away. Kathy and Chris have been aged up, so there's no risk of Kathy and Chris needing to grow up and go through puberty and go through all of the confusing emotions and changes that come along with that, especially while trapped in the attic. In this adaptation, no romantic relationship develops between Kathy and Chris, and there's no sexual assault. According to the director Jeffrey Bloom, nude and incest scenes were removed from the final cut to appease test audiences who had negative reactions to such scenes in a previous cut. The studio and producers also wanted these scenes removed from the film, as well as any suggestive shots, so the film would be shorter for more screenings, and so the film would receive a PG-13 rating from the MPPA. The film's ending is also quite different. In this film, Kathy, Chris, and Carrie confront Corinne during her wedding ceremony, exposing themselves and her secrets to all of the guests. They call her mother. Corinne says she doesn't know who they are, says it's a prank, and refuses to acknowledge them as her children. Kathy tries to get Corinne to eat one of the poisoned cookies she had been feeding them, and which had killed Corey, but instead, Corinne falls off of a balcony and dies. The three surviving children then leave the mansion as their grandmother looks on. This version of the grandmother is probably the cruelest. Even though her abuse is toned down, it genuinely feels like she hates the children. She's cold and loveless towards them, and takes some pleasure in hurting them. Her religious tyranny is way more prevalent in this version. More often than not, she's holding onto her Bible or rosary, often clutching onto them, keeping them close to her body, almost as if she's hiding behind them. She's consistently threatening the children with God and warns them that what she doesn't see, he does, and what she can't punish them for, he will. All of the performances in this film are bad. They're all weak and stiff and kind of annoying. We're supposed to be rooting for the children, Kathy especially, yet Kathy is one of the most annoying characters in this film. I think this is ultimately because she isn't a clueless child, she's an angsty teenager. Both the grandmother and Corinne are bad in this adaptation. Chris actually feels like a grown-ass man, and next to the grandmother, he looks like a grown-ass man. Although the 2014 adaptation also feels like a soapy TV movie, it is a Lifetime movie after all. It is definitely the strongest adaptation. It tones down the themes of the book and changes others, which ultimately changes the story and how we view the characters. The continuity is less of an issue, the timeline of the story is clear and it doesn't feel rushed. The performances are much stronger in this film. The children are far less annoying in this version. Both Kathy and Chris feel like young teenagers, and that's probably because the actors were young teenagers and look like young teenagers. We see a lot more of Corinne in this adaptation. We get a glimpse into her relationship with her father. We see more of the complicated relationship between her and her mother. And we see her gradual transition from a loving mother to a selfish, spoiled, abusive mother. I actually think she's a lot scarier than her mother in this film, which I think was intentional, as in the second and third film, she is the main villain. Her children are still being haunted by her and her abuse, and especially in the case of Kerry, are really struggling to live with and move on from the trauma. The grandmother really isn't that mean or scary in this adaptation. She has been toned right down. She's definitely still abusive, but she seems to actually care for the children. She almost always seems to be worried or afraid of the children or for them. And in her own ways, she's actually quite compassionate towards them. For Christmas, the children make her a present, which she rejects. But she sadly rejects the gift. And when she returns the next day, she's giving the children a gift. Real flowers to go in their fake garden. She even warns the children about the powdered sugar donuts, telling them, "I wouldn't eat them if I were you. They're not good for your health." On the other hand, she's warning them because she knows Corinne is poisoning them. Again, she is still very much abusive towards the children, but she seems to take more enjoyment out of humiliating and laughing at Corinne and her desperate need for the family and the family's money. Religion and God are less prevalent in the film. They're still there, but by no means are they used in a threatening manner, even though they were maybe meant to be when it did come up. But if anything, it just feels like it's being used more so to warn the children. Much like in the book, in this film, Kathy and Chris are going through puberty and everything that comes along with that, including developing feelings for each other. This film completely removes Kathy's sexual assault and instead replaces it with consensual sex, which is initiated by Kathy. The film's producer, Michelle Wise, told The Hollywood Reporter she thought the book was transgressive, which works as a romance. You're rooting for these two people. When the film premiered on Lifetime, 6.1 million people tuned in to watch it. It was Lifetime's biggest premiere since 2012's Steel Magnolia. In 2012, American author Gillian Flynn wrote about her relationship to flowers in the attic for NPR. What kept me circling around to the beginning was the hyper-Gothic female evil. The emotionally cold, physically abusive grandmother. The cloying, manipulative, mind-warping mother. It felt so new and stunning to me. These witches who seemed quite real. I devoured the sequels less to learn about Kathy's love story than to see what kind of woman Kathy became and what she'd do with all of those awful urges she inherited. Regarding her novel Sharp Objects, she said, "Anyone who reads Sharp Objects will certainly see a little of the flowers' influence in there." Sarah Gran called V.C. Andrews a genius. Her work was unique. No one else could have written it. Robin Wasserman said, "I think a big part of the appeal of her work, especially Flowers in the Attic, is that she takes the universal emotional realities of adolescence and projects them onto an operatic stage. The feeling of captivity, the sense that your life is being decided for you by remote adults who have opaque and probably nefarious purposes, the temptation of forbidden love." Megan Abbott and Cassandra Clare are among some of the novelists who have praised and been influenced by Virginia's work. Her books made and make people profoundly uncomfortable. They're hysterical books in that way, out of control and female and thus dangerous. I think we don't like to ponder what they tell us about young women, about ourselves, so they're dismissed because it's easier that way, says Abbott. Isabel Popp from Book Riot writes that a part of the novel's appeal is the forbidden nature of it. Given what happens in the novel, upon its release, it was immediately banned across America, American schools, and parents banned their children from reading the novel, which only made it more enticing to younger readers and more exciting to sneakily buy and hide from their parents, she writes. Which is what each author I just mentioned did. Gillian Flynn said, "I had a dime store copy that had been passed around my friends." In 2013, Flowers in the Attic editor Ann Patty credited Virginia as another appealing aspect of the book. She never really had much of a life, so she was stuck in the perceptions of the way the world works of a young teenager. Because after the age of 15, she wasn't in the world anymore. Flowers in the Attic is a great book, what I call an awful classic. Why is it so good? Because it captures the truth of being a captive. You have to remember, Virginia had been living in captivity for all of those years, in her wheelchair, totally under the control of her mother, who she did not have a great relationship with. Virginia was a hostage, as most teenagers feel like hostages to their parents. That's the power. The impact of V.C. Andrews and Flowers in the Attic and their legacy and IP continues to live on. In 2022, Lifetime premiered the adaptation of Garden of Shadows, the prequel novel to Flowers in the Attic, which was written primarily by Virginia's ghostwriter, Andrew Neiderman. The prequel novel received 4 90-minute films, which is impressive and excessive, given the book is only 384 pages long. These films focus on the marriage between Corinne's parents, starting with their meeting and ending when Corinne returns to Foxworth Hall with her children. So far, Lifetime has turned 22 V.C. Andrew novels into films, and in 2022, they acquired the rights and licensing to the entire V.C. Andrews catalogue. That's almost 150 titles, most of which were not written by V.C. Andrews herself, but her ghostwriter, Andrew Neiderman. If you would like to learn more about Virginia Andrews, I recommend checking out The Woman Beyond the Attic, the V.C. Andrews story, a biography which was written by Neiderman himself.